centre, and we're going to gather in as close as we can, because there's going to be stories going round. So anybody who wants to move in from the back, come on ahead in now. The tighter the circle, the closer the knit. What we're going to do this evening, just for anyone who's never been to a storytelling session before, the first thing I'm going to do is get a microphone out of my hand so I can keep my hand free here. So, as I've never been in a band before, I'll just have to see if I manage that properly. How's that? God, you're an easy to please crowd. That's a great start. Well, as Anne said, I'm the storyteller in residence with Monaghan County Council through Monaghan County Libraries, and I'd like to say a big thanks to Karen McCaig and to the council for the opportunity to take on the gig and hopefully get storytelling spread around County Monaghan as it used to be in times gone past. And the way a night like this operates is that I'm going to tell stories for a time, and then I'm going to throw it over to the crowd to get a story or two out of anyone who's in the room. And if anyone who's in the room was up in the Tin Church in Lara at the end of last month, there's a very hard act to follow up there, so there is, because there was a crowd of storytellers up there, and they were good crack. That's all I can say about them. Now, sometimes with a storytelling session, what we do is we would pick a theme, and the theme might be, when we were in the Tin Church, it was love and loss and marriage and more. And because we were over in Clonus here, I thought that maybe a transport theme might be appropriate. Now, when I say transport, it's using the term very, very loosely, because people have been coming in and out of Clonus by all manner of means for thousands and thousands of years. As a matter of fact, they say that when Noah was sailing across the earth in his ark, it was a bit like today. There was an awful lot of heavy rain, so there was back then. And they say that he was sailing over Ireland and he saw the last Kerry man sitting at the top of Carrantoohil Mountain, thumbing the lift. And Noah shouted at him, "Sorry," he said, "I can't take any passengers. The Lord's instructions." And the Kerry man said, "Go on, you whore." He said, "There's only a shower anyway." So they say when Noah was floating away in his ark over Ireland, one direction, that there was another ark on the water. And in that other ark, it said there was a son of Noah's called Bith, or Bay. And he landed in Ireland with 3 men and 75 women. Well, the number of women goes up and down. I've heard from 49 up to 75. But Bith was one of the first men to die in Ireland. And it said he's buried just north of the town here, out on Slieve Bay, or Slieve Bith. So the mountain was called after him. They said he was buried out there by his 21 wives at Carnmore in Fermanagh. Yeah, so 21 wives. Cause of death, unknown. Suspected exhaustion, I'd say. But they say that's where Bith was buried, and he gives his name to the mountain, Slieve Bay, Bith's mountain. And if you're a MacVeigh in Ireland, you're descended from Bith. And if you're a Macbeth in Scotland, you're descended from Bith. So he'd have good pedigree. But Bith, like I say, he came in onto Slieve Bay, and Slieve Bay, there's a lot of people have come into this area over the years. One of them was a fellow you might have heard tell of called St. Patrick. And St. Patrick came across Slieve Bay after doing a bit of preaching in Clogher during Lent. And it said that he was crossing the mountain, and because it was Lent, he couldn't eat any of the game on the mountain. So he couldn't catch any of the grouse or hares or rabbits. He just had to keep tramping on, and he was getting right hungry. So he stopped at a stream, and he laid in under the edge of the stream, under the bank, and he tickled a few trout. It's a skill that would be sort of very little known now, but there'd be the odd poacher, maybe along the River Fean, might have had it in times come past. And he caught 3 trout, but he put them in his pilgrim sack. He had no way to cook them. And it said that as he came on over the mountain, he met a herdsboy, a young fella minding pigs or hogs. And the young fella had a fire going. And St. Patrick asked him, could he roast his fish on the fire? And the young fella said, no problem at all, you can roast your fish here. So Patrick took out his 3 fish and he put them on the fire and he had them grilled just to a T. And when he had them grilled and ready to eat, there was a big disaster. No salt. Well, he turned his pilgrim sack inside out. There wasn't a pick of salt to be had in it. And the herdsboy, he was after having his dinner and he had used all the salt he had. So there was no salt to be got there either. So what do you do if you're in dire straits? You pray. St. Patrick got down on his knees and he started to pray. And the sky got dark. And the next thing, there was a whiteness on the grass and it looked like the moon on a field of corn. And the young fella said, snow in July. And St. Patrick said, not at all, salt. And he went out and he picked up the salt. And they say that where the salt fell, it's in a place called Knockatallon. So if anybody ever was out in Knockatallon, it's the hill of salt. And if you go up the top of it, they say there's a patch of grass up there, and if you eat it, there's a salty taste off the grass still to this day. And it's good for curing cattle and curing animals. So I just wanted to let you know that people have been coming into this area for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, people have used all manners and means of transport to get around our local area, North Monaghan, and across the border in Fermanagh and Tyrone. And one of the things about a storytelling night is you can remember people that aren't with us anymore and tell a story about them and the things they might have done, and it brings them back to life for a wee moment. And there was a man that I never met, and I often heard stories about him, so if what I'm about to tell you is lies, then it's lies I was told. And he was a man called Liam, and he worked for local farmers down in North Monaghan in the Emmyvale area. And Liam he was, among other things he was fond of a drink. And he was going to Emmyvale one night, late on. It was after a hard day's work. It was summertime, the pubs were open until 11:30, but the job had been going on long and late on the farm, and Liam had been trying to get to the pub. He was running way behind time. So he was going into Emmyvale on his bicycle, and as he was coming towards the bridge in Emmyvale, he could see the High House Bar. I don't know if you've ever been down in Emmyvale, some of you might know it. And as he was coming towards the bridge, he was thinking of the pint he was going to have when he get into the bar. And the next thing, Sergeant Sorahan stood out in the road in front of him, stopped him. He said, Peter Whelan, where are you going this time of night? He said, I'm just going into the village for a drink. And the sergeant said, well, not just yet, you're not, he said. And he took out the notebook and he pulled out the pen and he says, Peter Whelan, he said, bald wheel on front of bicycle. And he wrote it in the book. And then he looked at it again and he said, Peter Whelan, no light on front of bicycle. And he wrote it in the book. And then he went round the back and he said, no brakes on bicycle. And that went in the book as well. And also, no tail light on bicycle. And as this was going on, Liam Pat was watching the pub. And the lights were flicking, It was last orders, and he wasn't going to make it on time, so he got off the bike and he set it up on the ditch and he says, I tell you what, Sergeant Soran, write in your book there, Liam Pat Whelan, no bike. So that was how Pat got in for his drink on time. And every time I come to Clonus, there's a man that I always think of. He was a man called Peter Smith. And Peter Smith was a fella who worked in Tidavnet. When I knew him in the 1970s, he was an old man, but he was born in Monaghan Workhouse in 1902. So if he was alive today, he'd be 120 this year. And the local people in Didavnet were always very fond of him because he was witty and he was quick, he was sharp. And he would have had cause to come to Clonus on many an occasion for football matches, because this was where all the best football was played, and you'd come here for an Ulster final. But back those days, it was hard sometimes to get a lift. And Peter had to walk to a football match here one time. And whenever he got back home to Didavnet, the locals asked him, did he walk the whole road? He says, no, he says, I did not. He says, only walked the one side of it. And again, it was a day like today, he was at the match. It wasn't a very good game of football, and there was a torrential downpour at one point during the match. And somebody asked him what the game was like. He says, wasn't up to much. He said, three bad teams. So you have to think about that one. And if you're not from Monaghan, about to tell you, around here you could have a team of rain. So that was the nature of the people who come in and out of this area. But I'm going to pick up a piece of paper here because I just wanted to tell you a wee bit about a guy called Peter McKenna from Monaghan. And when I was young, Peter McKenna from Monaghan, he would ceilidh with my uncles and aunts. And what I was telling you there was just anecdotes, but Peter would tell stories that were folklore. And it's one of those stories that I want to share with you tonight. Because when I say you can travel, and tonight's theme is about travel, it's very, very loose, you know. And you can travel by train, by plane, by boat. But there's also another world, another dimension. And sometimes people have travelled in and out of it. And if you were out in Sleeve Bay Mountain, there used to be a lady living out there called Kathleen Murray, and Kathleen told me about wandering into that other dimension one time, where she was out after the cattle and she strayed onto a fairy path. Don't know, has anyone in the room ever strayed onto a fairy path? No, then you'd all be in big trouble inside here. Would anyone in the room know how to get off a fairy path?
Turn your coat inside out.
Turn your coat inside out.
Oh.
Yeah? That's how you do it.
I thought you'd have a day.
Not at all. You turn your coat inside out, and they say you turn around 3 times and you go, yoo-hoo! Because if the fairies or the good people think that you're mad, they'll let you go. So, I bet when you were coming out here tonight, you never thought you were going to get life-saving information, you know, to carry you through the year ahead. So be very careful out in that mountain out there. Well, anyway, there was a man lived out on Sleeve Bay Mountain, out near Knockatallon, and his name was Pat McKenna. And he got married and he was building a new house. And of all the places he chose to build his house, where did he pick to build it but between 2 fairy forts? And the people in the locality told him, don't build your house between 2 fairy forts because you'll be on the fairy path. And you do not want to be on a fairy path. But he said, sure, it was a bit like today. Sight was hard to get. And he was lucky to get the one he had, and he went on ahead and he built his house anyway. Not like nowadays, you know, not 3,000 square feet. No, this man built a very simple cottage. Kitchen in the middle, bedroom at one end, and a parlour, or it could be a second bedroom at the other end. He moved into it with his wife, and the first night they were in bed together, at midnight, the front door opened and banged shut. And the next thing he heard across the kitchen floor, pit pat, pit pat. And then they heard, you know, some voices whispering. And then all was quiet. And himself and the wife were lying in bed, and they had the covers pulled up to their chin, and them trembling with fear in the bed. You know, they didn't know what was going on. The next night, the same thing happened. The door opened and it banged shut. Just like this. And then what did they hear? Across the kitchen floor. Pit, pat, pit, pat. And then, at the fire, And then all quiet. And the man of the house, again, they were terrified, but the man of the house was getting more used to the noise as the nights went on and getting more curious. So he took his courage in his hands, and one night he stepped into the kitchen and he pulled out the settle bed from beside the hearth and he got in behind it. And at midnight the door opened and it banged shut. And he heard across the kitchen floor, pit pat, pit pat. And when he looked out from behind the settle bed, what did he see on the floor? There was a wee man. He was about 1.5 foot high, and he was wearing green breeches and a little brown jacket, and he had a wee red cap on his head and a feather in it. And he stood in front of the fireplace, and he opened up his jacket, and he put his hand inside, and he took out a little silver dish. And he held the silver dish then in his left hand, and he put up his right hand and he said, "Dip the finger and not the thumb and hie away off to Scotland." And he touched his finger into the middle of the little dish and whoosh, off the chimney he went, just like that. And your man couldn't believe it. So the next night he was watching again. Same thing, door open, bang shut, pit pat, pit pat. Dip the finger, not the thumb, hie away off to Scotland. Up the chimney he went. And the third night, the man was really determined he was going to find out what was going on here for certain, for sure. He was going to grab hold of that wee man and he was going to make him tell him. So the third night, he pushed the settle bed even closer to the fireplace. And at midnight, the door opened and it banged shut. What did he hear across the floor? You tell me. Pit, pat, pit, pat. And then the wee man opened his jacket, took out the silver dish, held it in his left hand, lifted his right hand, and he said, "Dip the finger and not the thumb, and hie away off to..." Before he could say another word, the man jumped out from behind the settle bed and said, "I have you!" But of course he was just grabbing thin air. The wee man had disappeared altogether. He couldn't see where he had gone. It's very hard to catch a fairy. If you're never out in the mountain and you see one.